Guys, thank you so much. What a hoot. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I'm using one of these little fangled ear thingies, and I hope it's okay. And I guess somebody will let me know real quick if they can't hear it. But what a treat. These guys this morning, I didn't realize I was going to enjoy this stuff as much as I have. And I want to say thanks to Carol and Don and Robin and Betty and Pat. What a hoot. It just... there's something about being shoulder to shoulder with people of like mind that always makes me smile real big, and it's an honor to get a chance to do this and to get a chance to remember a little bit of stuff about Clifford too, and I sure miss that rascal. And guys, I sobered up in January the 15th of '88, and I needed to. There are a lot of people that were really happy that I did, and I'm a third generation drunk, and so the rumor that my great grandfather was a drunk, but my grandfather was, and my dad was. My identical twin, Chris, the evil twin, he's also an alcoholic, and it's simply the coolest that there was a solution here when these other guys struggled and couldn't find a solution. And so, as far as I know, the rest of my family, other than Chris, died of the disease, and so we're pretty lucky. After years and years of sitting in war story meetings with people telling stories like this, I kind of got out of the habit of doing it. I just want to hit a couple of high parts on this stuff. I was one of these guys that said that I'm never gonna drink. Certainly, I'm never gonna drink like my dad, and so I was just gonna not drink at all. And I made it all the way through to my junior year in high school, and then somebody handed me a beer, and I said, "What's this?" And I just drank it, and then drank another one, and then drank another one. And the funny part about it was that it's like there were no wrecked cars or crazy stuff. I didn't lose my job. I didn't drop out of high school. I didn't. I just, for the very first time in my existence, felt like every dot was connected. I felt like I was going to be okay, and that piece of me that always felt disconnected and apart connected. And I felt sort of whole. And I remember looking at the sky one night, and it was kind of dark outside, and I was drinking a beer, and I was thinking, I get it. I understand why these rascals started doing this stuff, because this stuff is pretty special. And it would take me years to realize that booze affected other people differently. Most of us that are put together like me genetically, we all feel the same way. Normal people look at us and scratch their head and go, well, I don't get it. I don't understand what you're talking about. And so, but that's okay. Chris sobered up in November of '87, and he was working for me and my wife at the time in our bookbindery that was in Louisville, just north of Dallas. And it kind of caught me off guard. Chris was always the one that we figured was going to end up in trouble, and then he quit, and I wish I could say that I really was excited that he did, but I was fairly annoyed that he quit. He was my best drinking buddy, and he was the kind of guy you looked at and went, okay, if I ever drink as bad as him, I'll have to quit. And slowly but surely I began to do that, and it was just a weird feeling. I made his life kind of hell for a little while there because I wasn't really digging the whole idea. Now, Chris had been trying to get sober for a bunch of years and hadn't been able to pull it off, and he had the same kind of problem that I did. I don't have a problem stopping. I can stop on a dime. My problem is I can't stay stopped, and it would take me a while to kind of connect up to what the real problem with that is. But 2 months later, after Chris sobered up, he took me to my first meeting, and there were some things that happened toward the end of this thing. I got in some trouble trying to beat a guy up one night while my 3-year-old daughter watched me, and some things like this. And it was just one of those kind of deals where I'd been introduced to the joys of methamphetamines, and so the combination of the two kind of made me kind of mean, kind of scared, kind of fearful of everything, and it's not a breeding ground for a relationship kind of a thing. You end up with a lot of nightmare stuff. And so I'll tell you a quick story. I don't know if you've ever been around fly fishermen, but they're real live, true fly fishermen are in a kind of a religion by themselves. I mean, it's just we sort of worship the river and worship the flies and worship the fish and worship our gear. And it was, you know, and I'm a member of this big fancy schmancy fly fishing club in Dallas, and I've been waiting for literally years to be included in their little inner circle. And so I finally ended up inviting some guys out to a pond behind my house, and we got to be kind of buddies, and they invited me kind of on the QT to a little trip that they were planning with all the other big shots in the club, and I thought that I had arrived. It was pretty special. And at the last minute, Chris called me and said, hey, I got some outside issue stuff, and do you mind if I go with you? And I said, oh, no, come on, you can go with me too. And so here's two crazy alcoholics, and we're only staying one night, and it's just up in Oklahoma, and we've got a case of beer, a bottle of vodka, and a bunch of outside issue. And it's it's not. You can sort of see the writing on the wall. By the next morning, I'd fallen in the water, had scared every fish in the place. My tent had fallen down. Half of it had burned off. And we were just, I mean, it was, there's 6 or 7 men standing over there with their arms folded looking at me going, like, how did we get you and what is your deal? And it would take me like a month later, and I'd finally sober up. Chris would take me a couple months later, I guess. And Chris took me to my first meeting, and it was the coolest thing that I'd ever experienced, guys. I'm one of these guys that fell in love with AA from the very beginning. I thought it was the coolest thing. I love the people. I love the smoke-filled room. I didn't even smoke, and I would light a cigarette up. I mean, y'all understand how stupid that is? It was just like crazy stuff, and I just it was about a quarter of a mile from where our bindery was, and I could get down there every day and sit in meetings, and we could talk about our stuff, and we could make stories up if we wanted to. It was just a big old fun time, and I got sober, and I stayed sober. If it had stayed that way, guys, I don't know, my story sure would be different. But in a short period of time, maybe 2 years, it was fun. And then it got to a place where all of a sudden I'm going to these meetings, and I'm leaving the meetings more upset than I was when I went. There's no real relief there. I've heard everybody's story so many times I could recite them back to you. Everybody seems to be irritating, and I think it's fair to say and understand that I'm not working the steps. And I have a sponsor, but he's a sponsor in name only. He wore a nice suit of clothes, and he drove a black Mercedes, and I thought he was something pretty special because he's a businessman like I was a businessman, and that's about the extent of it. And so, but I'm struggling. 2 years turns into 3 years, and I'm struggling even more, and I'm having a tough time with a lot of things. Work is a real struggle. I'm starting to do some weird things like spend money on things I don't need. I don't know if anybody besides me would ever do that stuff, but I'm buying music I don't listen to. I'm buying clothes I don't wear. I'm buying tools I don't need. You get the picture. In the years to come, I'll watch men do this over and over and over again. I'll watch it manifest. Guys that I sponsor, it's funny. They'll get sober, and then pretty soon they're eating a half a gallon of Bluebell ice cream every night and a tube of Oreos, and or they're getting twisted up in some crazy stuff on the internet or whatever. But it's all of these things, and I don't know that this is internal stuff. I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand that I'm still treating the same internal condition. I don't understand, and there's nobody in my home group, God love them, that could help me with that dilemma. Instead of recognizing that I was getting sick, everybody just keeps patting me on the butt and telling me it's going to be okay. And so I remember I stayed. There's a real loyalty to the group, and I stayed for 3 weeks shy of 7 years, and I am thinking about suicide daily. I just simply can't get comfortable in my skin again. And I remember sharing at a meeting one night that I was probably not going to stay in AA, that it seemed to have stopped working, and that I don't know what I was going to do, but that this would probably be my last meeting. And I remember this guy interrupted me, and he said, Myers, he said, we've heard you say this over and over and over again, and I just don't understand. He said, why don't you look at it in the big picture? He said, you've been sober today, and you've been sober for what now, 6 years, something like that? I think you're a winner. And everybody in the room nodded yes, and everybody kind of like this. And one little lady in the back of the room kind of clapped her hands like this. And I remember I just looked at him and I went, "Oh, okay, Jim, thanks." And I remember walking outside of that group, and there my old Toyota Land Cruiser was parked out on the curb, and it was real hot. And I remember getting in that Land Cruiser, and I put my head down on that steering wheel, and I cried and I cried and I cried like a little bitty kid. I just simply didn't know what to do. I don't want to drink. I don't want to go back to the dope house. I don't want to do any of this stupid stuff. Y'all get that, right? I don't want to be that way. And yet the pain of living a life untreated is so amazingly sensitive to me that I'm just coming apart. And so I called Chris a couple of weeks later. I almost drank, and it was a pretty scary deal for me. And I called him, and we had a long conversation. And he said, "Well, tell me what happened when you called Cliff." And I said, "Who?" And he said, "Cliff Bishop." What happened when you called him? And I said, Chris, I didn't call him. He'd given me Cliff's number. He had met Clifford at a deal in Dallas. Chris now lives in the Hill Country, and so he'd come up here and to do a deal, and he had given me the number. I remember when he gave it to me like that, and I remember telling him that I was real busy and that I'd get to it when I could. And I remember Chris just like dead silence on the other end of the phone, and then pretty soon I heard the phone just kind of click down. The receiver just clicked off, and he had just hung up on me. And he wasn't mad. He just didn't know what else to do. The old lead, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink thing. That's what he was doing. He was trying to help me get connected. He'd been telling me for 4 years to find another group, find a group where they talk solution and not problem. Every day we started our meetings. Okay, who's got the problem today? And it'd be a pregnant pause that sometimes went 10 minutes before somebody said, "Well, I'm going to meet with my mother-in-law today, and I'm real nervous about that." And so we had talked the whole meeting about mother-in-laws, and God love them. I'm not here to judge anybody. I just, maybe a little bit, maybe a little bit, but it was a frustrating thing. And some of you guys have lived through that kind of crazy period in your sobriety. And so I went and called Clifford and asked him if I could come see him real quick, and he said yeah. And I drove into Dallas, and I remember walking up to his house, and he answered the door, and he looked at me, and I said, "Hi, Mr. Bishop, my name is Myers Raymer." And he looked at me, and he said, "Where's your big book?" And he was smiling kind of, but it wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting a big old AA hug and welcome, come in, this kind of. It's just not what I was expecting. And I said, "Well, I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I had no idea where that book was." And he said, "Well, here," and he kind of flipped his book, I thought a little hard, right in my stomach, and said, "Here, don't ever come back over here without a big book, buddy, because we're going to need it." And I went, "Yes, sir." And I remember he turned around and he walked back inside, and you could hear this little dog down the hallway going, "Yap, yap, 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 yap." And you could hear Elaine Bishop, his wife, saying something to the dog, and I'm listening to this thing down this hallway, and I'm thinking, you know what? This guy didn't know how to get a hold of me, and I could be out the door in a heartbeat. And then there's this moment of total, complete clarity where I recognize that if I choose to step off this porch, the chances of me dying is really good, that I might not make it at all. And so I walked into this man's living room and sat there with Cliff and Elaine, and we talked, and she was over there knitting or doing something. I don't remember what it was, but after a while, our conversation turned kind of weird, and she got up and left. And years later, she would tell me it was the most uncomfortable conversation she'd ever heard between two men. And the conversation was uncomfortable because Cliff Bishop was being kind. I see it now. He was trying to ask me some questions to see what I knew about the program, and I think he was a little bit caught off guard because I didn't know anything about the program. I'm almost 7 years in this thing, and I can't even tell you who the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous are. I can tell you every sordid detail about your past. I can tell you everything in the world like that, but I can't tell you anything about the program, the common solution that the book talks about. I couldn't tell you. And finally, I got tired of being embarrassed, and I just put up my hand, and I said, "Mr. Bishop, I I don't know the answer to any of these questions. And he said, we're finally making some progress. And he smiled at me really, really big. And he said, find your book and meet me over to meeting tomorrow night, and we'll get started. And I went, yes, sir, I will. And I remember walking out. I felt like I'd been bitch slapped. I know it was such a weird feeling. I didn't know, but there was some anxiousness about the whole thing because I realized that I was on a different trip, and I don't know how it was going to end up. But the next night I showed up and judged him mercilessly, and then Tuesday night I showed up again and judged him mercilessly, and I'm just, we have nothing but book studies, and I'm thinking book studies are for idiots and for people who don't really get AA, and I could not be more wrong, but they tolerated me. And it was the greatest example of grace that I'd been shown, was that these people who knew I was judgmental, who knew I was just not digging this stuff, they knew that maybe I'd get it, that maybe if I ever got my stupid arrogance out of the way, that something would happen. I remember sitting in a conversation with Clifford one night after a meeting, and he said, Myers, he said, you know what the real problem is going to be with this stuff? He said, the real problem here is not teaching you about the big book. It's not teaching you about this program. None of that's going to be tough. The tough part's going to get you is going to be about getting you to unlearn all these old ideas that you brought into this thing, because you got a head full of old ideas. And, buddy, I think you're going to find that a lot of them don't line up with what we're studying. At the time, it didn't mean anything to me, but later it would. Later, it would all kind of come crashing in, and I would realize how profound what he had told me was, because it was the absolute truth. I had a head full of old ideas that separated me from any new idea that could save me. And so 3 months later, you'll think I'm kidding you when I tell you this. 3 months later, we're in a meeting on a Thursday night. There's a kid named Philip File in there, Clifford and a bunch of people, and Gene Loughton, and there were a whole bunch of people in that meeting that night, and we're doing page 44, the title page of We Agnostics, and there's two questions that he asked there, this question of choice and control, and it's a black and white yes or no type of thing like this, and I get through the paragraph, and I went, in my head, I went, yes, holy cow. And it all of a sudden just came rushing in that I'm an alcoholic. Guys, all of those years, I knew I was badly behaved. I knew I'm a knucklehead. I mean, I know I'm a lot of things, but I never really had conceded and made the distinction that I was truly an alcoholic. And there it was in black and white. I remember I told Philip afterwards, we were putting chairs up, I said, hey, Philip, I'm an alcoholic. And he looked at me and he kind of squinted his eyes a little bit. I'll remember it like it was yesterday. And he goes, well, I keep coming back. Myers, I don't know what to say, man. I thought you've been around for a lot of years. I figured you'd figure this out by now. And I said, no, I don't know. And I ran home and kicked the front door open. My wife was right inside the door when I kicked it open, scared the crap out of her. And I said, Londa, I'm an alcoholic. And she looked at me and she goes, no shit, Myers. And she doesn't ever cuss. And she just looked at me and said, no kidding. I thought we knew this. I thought we had this all figured out. And I'm going, bud, y'all may have connected it up, but I didn't. But let me tell you why it was important, guys, because all of a sudden I could quit playing games with it. I could quit. It was sort of my trump card out of jail kind of thing. If I'm not a real alcoholic, then as soon as this stuff gets tedious, as soon as you guys get goofy with me, or I get enough resentments, I can just go, well, screw it. I'm not. I got to get out of here, and I could leave. Knowing that I had a disease that was destined statistically to kill me changed everything. It changed everything. And so I was off to the races, guys. I was Myers Raymer Big Book Thumper, and proud of it. And I just, for a year and a half, almost 2 years, I was Cliff Bishop's book boy. Every night he'd be going out, carrying the message, going to some wind-up joint. I'm talking 2 or 3 times a week, every week. He's out carrying the message, and I'm his book boy. I'm going to go carry the books for him and pick them up afterwards, and I'm close enough to the solution. I'm close enough to the real thing here, guys, that I can play the role that I love the best, and that's the role of poser. I don't really want to do 12-step work. I don't really want to do what Cliff Bishop is doing. I just want the perception that I'm doing what Clifford's doing. and I know it's going to be kind of hard to get, but I just because what Clifford's doing takes brains, and I don't have that kind of brains. I'm and some guys do, some guys don't, and I'm not going to be smart enough or quick enough or wise enough to do this. And so I'll just stand close enough to the whole deal that it'll rub off on me, and I'll get the good stuff, and I can bow up and tell people what a 12-step guy I am. And I remember telling Cliff about it one night, and Clifford goes, Myers, I think we maybe ought to have a conversation. I think you've gotten something confused here. What you're doing when you make coffee, when you pick up cigarette butts, when you do this other stuff, you're doing work that's really important. But this is service work that makes 12-step work possible, but you're not doing 12-step work. And I got real indignant, real bowed up, and I'm going, hell, I'm not. And I just got like an old pouty kid, and I finally got to a place where there was a little schism there, and I backed off for a little bit. And I remember sitting in a meeting one night, and Dara was chairing the meeting, and she was trying. It was like I'm right in front of her, and she's looking everywhere except at me. I've got my hands up. I want to make a comment on something she just said, and she knows what I'm going to do. She knows I'm going to try to say something funny, because if I can say something that deflects things a little bit, I can be a part of without having to understand what it is that I'm talking about. And she knew I was going to do that. And so finally I would go, oh, like I'm just like that. And she looks at me and she closes her eyes and she says, Myers. And so I did. I said something totally stupid that was off topic, that just like this. And there were a couple people in the room that laughed, and most everybody rolled their eyes like they usually did. And I saw Cliff Bishop get up off his chair, and he starts walking towards me. Now, Scout's honor, guys, if I'm lying, I'm dying. I'm telling you right now. Cliff Bishop is walking toward me, and I'm sitting there. I set up straight in my chair, and I'm kind of looking at him, and I'm thinking, he's getting ready to come over here and tell me how good I sounded, or that he's so proud of me, or that whatever the deal is like this. But this is going to be a pat on the back. And he walks past me, and he throws a note down on the table in front of me, and it slides off and hits me in the chest and falls on the floor. And he kept walking. And I remember getting down there and picking it up and looked at it like this. And the note, which was stapled in my big book for years until that big book got stolen, said, why don't you shut up until you know what's in that big book? And I just went, oh. I can take some crap from regular people, but this is my sponsor, for crying out loud. And I remember going, screw this, I don't need it. And I got up and I walked toward the door, and Philip got up and walked toward the door and caught me at the door. The meeting is still going on, and he pulled me out of the doorway outside, for just right outside the doorway. And he just said, Myers, he said, you gotta stay. You'll die if you leave. And I'm always grateful that he did, because I would have left for sure. My ego had gotten bruised, and I just couldn't see it. My pride, which I didn't see. Anyway, I walked back in and sat down. I didn't go back to my chair. I just sat on a chair right inside the door. I just sat around like this. And I remember Philip taking 2 steps away from me, and then he backed up a little bit, and he got down to my ear, and he said, by the way, there's a whole bunch of us in here that got that same note. And I started laughing, and I thought, okay, maybe it'll be okay. And it was. And so Clifford, within another 5 or 6 months, it came to a head that I wasn't doing 12-step work, and he made me do it. And I won't go into a whole story on it, but they tricked me. Is basically what they did. Was we were going to go down to Salvation Army, and they were all going to be down there. And he said, I'll see you tomorrow night at Salvation Army. And I said, okay. And I got down there, and they had already prearranged. He denies it. To the bitter end, he denied it. But I'm telling you, Clifford never missed a gig in his whole life. And that night, nobody was down there from Primary Purpose Group except me. And so I had to walk in there and do that talk for those guys. And I was scared spitless. And thank God they had a podium, and I could set my book down on top of that podium, because my hands were shaking so bad I couldn't hold it. We had us a fine meeting. And then they asked me to come back the next day, which surprised me, and I did. And let me tell you, guys, what transpired over the next 4 or 5 months was a transformation of who I was and what I thought AA was, because all of a sudden I had this graphic illustration that every theme that the Big Book talks about, and this one of service and self-sacrifice is repeated over and over and over again. And I just want to look the other direction. But nothing affected my life more than taking some responsibility and realizing that I didn't have to be sharp. I didn't have to be smart, quick, good looking. I didn't have to be nothing except willing. And God would step in and take care of the rest of it. And he has ever since. I've had the opportunity to travel all over the world. I've been in all kinds of crazy places, and I was in Europe 5 times in 1 year, carrying this message. And I always sit back and scratch my head and just kind of look off in the distance and go, how is this possible? How is this possible that an arrogant little pissant like me could get to do this stuff? And then I recognize the stuff that Clifford told me all along. Myers, if you'll just simply submit to the process and do it without the attachments, without all the expectations, if you just get up and do what you're supposed to do, that miraculous things will happen. And I always thought that he meant that miraculous things will happen to the people that you're talking to. I didn't realize that he was talking about that it would happen to me, that I'm one that would be transformed. Guys, worldwide, it's a crazy deal. Worldwide, we have this illusion. Sometimes it's a delusion that once we get clear of the booze and the dope, our life will straighten out and we'll be okay. And then some of us, me included, were amazingly caught off guard when our life completely dissolved, completely imploded, and there's been no booze or dope in the picture for a long time. That's the nature of an internal condition that's trying to be treated with a bunch of external stuff, and that's the reason why this is so. This is the reason why it was so important that we got back to the basic text and we started looking at a common solution again. There was a guy, some of you may have heard him, Don Pritz, who was sort of an AA icon, passed away some years ago, and in one of Don's talks, he said that somewhere along the line we stopped talking about recovery and we just started talking about sobriety. That somehow or another, sobriety was all that seemed to matter. How many months, how many years can you put together? Whereas in the olden days, when the first 100 were writing the big book and when we were kind of vetting this whole process about what we do, recovery was a huge deal. One of the most reoccurring themes in the big book was this idea that we could recover. It's just sort of a crazy sort of a deal. I try to be real gentle when I talk about this stuff. When I travel, I try to be real careful with it because I know how adamant I was that what I was doing, going to 6 meetings a week, was the best I could do. And my goal is never to frustrate or stir up anybody. I had a guy one time say, "I bet you just like pissing people off," and I wanted to punch him in the neck. I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable ever. And Clifford was one of the best helps that I ever had on this thing. Because he used to listen to every talk that I did. I'd come back and he'd go, "Well, you've done 3 travel talks and I haven't heard the CDs." Okay, I'll bring them. And then I'd bring them to him. And then he'd call me back and he'd go, "Okay, that talk was good. Myers, you sounded pretty arrogant on this other talk. I don't know what was going on." And I'm going, "Well, I don't either." And it used to irritate me a lot. And I'd get real frustrated with it. But then I recognized and realized that left on my own devices, I don't see things the way they are a lot of times. I don't see that. Londa, my wife, had been telling me that for years, and I realize it. I see it now. Without somebody in your life that you can trust, that you've given spiritual consent to, and it's one of those kind of things where I began to count on Clifford to tell me the truth about what was going on, and he'd tell me. We always just laugh about it, but he never forgot. He said, "Myers, it's been a long time since you brought me some CDs to listen to." "Yes, sir, I know." And then I'd bring him a big old stack of them like this, and he'd listen to all of them. I was weird. I said, "Don't you get tired of hearing this?" He said, Yeah, I do. But it's good to know that you're growing. It's good to know that it's been a long time since I've had to call you down about being arrogant or about being judgmental or about." And I'm thinking, this is good. This is good stuff. I'll tell you a fast story real quick. And we were using Joe McQuaney's study guide that they used at Recovery Dynamics for when I first got there to that group. We used it for 2 or 3 years, I guess, maybe 4 years. I can't remember for sure, but we used it for a number of years. And that study guide only went up through the end of Chapter 7, working with others. And Clifford always, we'd get there, and Clifford would go, God, I wish we could keep going, because this other stuff's got some great book left. And I went, yeah. And so he talked to Joe, who was his sponsor at the time, and he said, hey, could you add to it? And Joe said, no way. It's already been all the copyright stuff's already been done, and this is what we use in treatment, and this is as far as we can get them in treatment, and so this is all we're going to do. He said, but you're welcome to write one. Use the same format if you want to, and just write your own. And so Clifford asked me about it. We were sitting there one night, and he said, do you think we could do this? And I said, I can't do it. I mean, Clifford, I can't write a check, much less and he goes, oh, well, I'll give it a try. The very next meeting, he came with the preface forward to the first edition, forward to the second edition that he'd already written. And he said, so can you check this? And I said, yeah, I can check this. And the whole time I'm thinking, yeah, I'll check it. I'll hand it to my wife and let her check it, because she's 10 times smarter than me. And so Londa became the proofreader for all of the stuff. And so, and then he'd write pieces of it, and then we'd do it a little bit in the meeting. And hell, within a month or so, he had the whole thing written. And then we proofed it and went back, and he rewrote some parts, and then we went back and then we did a trial through with the group, and then we got the whole thing written. And then we made 2 changes after that with things that we had spotted during the course of going through the study guide thing. But I remember Clifford saying, we need to print some of these up now, because we've been through the sampling on it. We need to go ahead and print something up that we could use for the group. And I said, well, how many do you want to do? And he said, well, let's do 30 or 40. And I'm looking at the cost of printing 30 or 40 of them. And I said, well, all right, we can do that. And then I got a price on doing 200 of them. And I said, Clifford, it's still expensive. It's still several $1,000s to print them and bind them. But we can, if we keep our cost, I'm not trying to make anything off of them. Let's just take the cost. And he said, well, let's do 200 of them. And I said, Clifford, what if we get stuck with these things? And he said, well, we'll figure out a way. I'll help you pay for them, and we'll get through it. Let's go ahead and print 200 of them. And I went, okay. And so we did. And we printed and bound 200 of them and brought them to the group, and we put them out there, and we started going through the thing. The first weekend we were there doing this thing, there's a guy from Louisiana come through on a Saturday night, and he saw the study guide, and he said, oh, man, we'd love to do that in our halfway house in Lafayette. He said, any chance I could buy some from you? He said, yeah, sure. How many you want? And he said, 25. And so we sold him 25. And then we just kept going and kept going and kept going. Pretty soon, Londa was tapping me on the shoulder and going, we're going to have to order more of these if we're going to do these. And I went, I know. And so we did, and then we did again, and then we did again. And my last count, we were a little over 11,000 study guides that had been sold at our cost to produce them. In 1 month, 2 months ago, we sold 63 study guides in one month. It's just... It freaks me out. Clifford would be laughing. He'd just be laughing. Every time he ordered some more, he'd be laughing some more, and he'd be telling me about it. Who knew? None of us knew. None of us had any idea that there would be people that would want to hear this stuff. It's funny. When I travel, it's funny, I'll be in Europe or I'll be in Canada, and I was in Canada a couple of months ago doing a workshop, and when I walked in the room, all these people stood up and screamed, and there were like 15 people on the one end of the room, all had red T-shirts on that had Primary Purpose Group Toronto or Ontario or something, but it was wherever it was that they were from, they were all there. And this happens over and over. I don't think I've talked any place in the last 5 or 6 years that I didn't have folks come up and go, hey, we're a member of the Primary Purpose Group in East you-know-where. And you just kind of go like, holy cow, pretty crazy. And they all start just like we did. They start out slow, and then they build momentum, and I tell them all exactly the same thing. You got to stay consistent, and you got to just keep doing it. Funny thing, 12-step fellowships are filled with people that are not willing to get on a ship if it's not fully righted and sailing at top speed. If it looks like it's still in trial, they won't come. And I can remember nights early on sitting at Primary Purpose Group when there'd be like 10 or 11 of us sitting in a meeting, and you watch them now with 200 people in that room, and you go, how did we ever get from there to there? Well, consistency. and doing what it is that we do. I got to tell you, when I tell part of these stories, Clifford was always my hero on this stuff because he seemed to have a backbone made out of a tire tool. I mean, he was just so dogmatic about the things that he did and the things that he said. He could be really, really loving, but he could be really, really insistent that we keep doing the stuff that was working. When we first printed the study guide, for almost 10 years, they wouldn't recognize us in Dallas. They wouldn't recognize us as a bona fide AA group because it was because we didn't have any discussion meetings, and so there was a lady up there, and I'm not going to jam her up too much. There was a lady up there that didn't like us for whatever reason, and so as far as I know, she'd never been to one of our meetings, but she made sure that we stayed off of their meeting schedule forever and ever. And Clifford told me about it, and I said, Clifford, that's BS, and you know it. There's no way that they could do that. And he said, how about you take your phone and call them? And I did. I took my phone out, and I called them Dallas Intergroup, and I said, hey, I just landed at Love Field, and I'm kind of heading back up towards, north of there, and I'm looking I'd like to find a literature-based meeting, like a book study, like in the Midway Hills area, like in the like Midway area, and she goes, well, we don't have anything up there, but if you'll just keep driving up down the road a little bit, stay on Midway and drive up there like this, and there's another group up there that's got a discussion meeting that starts at 6:30, and you'll love it. And I went, okay, thanks a whole bunch. He was telling the truth, and it freaked me out. Fortunately for everybody, she retired, and I hope that she's living a great life and happy as a clam. But I was glad to see her get out of that position. And there was another lady that got in there, and for whatever reason, she dug the heck out of us. And she was instrumental in helping us get plugged into their Night Watch program and their 12-step stuff. And we had a great time. And she was just such a hoot and such a contrast to the way it was. But persistence pays off. You just keep doing the same thing and kind of see what happens, and be a pretty good deal. Let me get back on track here. I want to mention a couple of things real quick. There was a piece of me that always wondered how things got so goofy. We had these great meetings where we're studying the basic text, and then I see what we're studying, and then I try to line it up with what I've heard in AA, and they're two distinctly different things. Meeting Makers Make It doesn't necessarily line up with what's in the big book, and there's a whole bunch of that kind of stuff in there, and so what we began to do is we began to pay attention to a bunch of historical stuff, and we began to look through the archives, and I got to be one of those history nerds that I always thought were really goofy, and I became the worst of them, reading everything I could get my hands on. And what I began to realize was that historically there was this little piece. So stick with me. If you hate history, just mute off for a second or close me up for a minute. I'm only going to talk about this for 5 minutes. Some of you guys that are older like me will remember a guy named Harold Hughes, who was a senator and quite a guy. He was one of the early guys that got on the bandwagon. He was an alcoholic, and he got on the bandwagon with AA along with Marty Mann and a whole bunch of other astronauts and movie stars. And there was Dick Van Dyke, and there was a whole bunch of guys that were involved in this stuff, guys. And they all made these monumental changes where medically they were accepting this as a disease, and it was a pretty cool deal. And so when Nixon got booted out of office in 1971, the last piece of legislation that they signed into law was this thing called the Hughes Act that Harold Hughes wrote, not Howard Hughes the actor. This is a different guy. That Harold Hughes wrote, and basically what it did is it put teeth in the recovery industry, in the treatment industry, so that money could be charged for treatment. Now, this is good in a lot of ways, and it was bad in some ways. It was, I'm saying on par, it was better for everybody, because there were a lot of people that could get help that couldn't get help otherwise. You saw this amazing jump in the number of people that came to recovery land. The downside, the problem with this stuff is that you ended up with a lot of people that were not real alcoholics, that hadn't been vetted at all. They just showed up in treatment, went through their deal, and then showed up in an AA meeting. And because we loved the people that were coming in, and we didn't want to be exclusionary in any way, we just sort of said, welcome, welcome, welcome. And so what we did was, it took us 36 years to get the first 500,000 members of AA. 36 years to get the first 500,000. It took us 5 years after the Hughes Act to get the next 500,000. Y'all get what I'm saying? All of a sudden, we were covered up with people. Our rooms were full of people. Some of them were bona fide, the real deal, that were seeking a solution, and some of them were people who drank an extra glass of wine, left playing a bridge party, and ended up with a DWI and ended up in treatment. They were not alcoholic. They did not have the same problem that we had, and unfortunately, their solution wasn't the same either. And so you ended up with a lot of nice people. There were all these were great people, but you just had a lot of people that were saying things that weren't true. These were guys who could come to meetings and hang out and stay sober. They were fine. The problem with this stuff is, guys, is that you can't line it up with what was in the basic text. You can't line the stuff up. We're going to love them into sobriety. Well, you got to be careful. I mean, if love was all it took, well, my mom and dad or my wife would have got me sober. Love was an important thing, and it's an element that we must never forget, ever. Program without love is a weird deal. But this idea that it's all about that it can't be about the steps. We found ourselves in this weird place where more and more and more people were pushing off the big book and settling for just a meeting. And we ended up with a lot of people that were struggling, and we ended up with a lot of people that had some unkind things to say about our fellowship. And so, guys, in the last 22 years, we've had no growth in AA, none. And there'll be years where we'll have 1% growth, and then we'll have a year when we have 1.5% decrease, and then we'll stay steady for 2 years in a row, and then we'll get 2% growth, and then it'll drop off. But when you do the math on it, when you just across the board, in 20 years, we've not had any growth in AA. That's straight out of New York City. That's straight out of GSO from their statistics. And it's problematic. Nobody wants to look at it. It's the 500-pound naked guy sitting in the room. Why is it that we could grow like weeds in my garden, and then all of a sudden stop? What is it that we're not doing that we were doing then? And Clifford was a big help in helping me understand and see. Without being mean, without being snarky, without being judgmental, he just helped me look at what we had stopped doing. And there were a lot of things that we were doing in early AA that we stopped doing. And the result was we stopped growing. People stopped. We never had trouble. If you look at it statistically, we've never had trouble getting people to come to AA. We have a hard time getting them to stay in AA. And then we end up with people like Charlie, Sheen, and a bunch of other movie stars that, they come in and they sample this stuff. There was a letter in an op-ed piece one time that said some of the nastiest things about AA I've ever heard in my whole life. And within a couple of weeks after it came out, I probably had 20 emails from people going, "What do you think? Let's go firebomb that guy's house." And they were kidding, and we were all smiling at each other like this. But it was like he was just saying some unkind things. And I was sitting there at the dinner table one night and reading some stuff, and then I looked down and I started reading the article again, and I realized that the things that he said were the things that he'd been taught. He didn't make any of it up. He wasn't being mean just to be mean. This is exactly what he had been taught in the meetings that he was going to. This is exactly what he'd been taught, and it made me sick. It made me kind of feel sort of wore out. Because how do you change a fellowship that believes that the meeting is now the center of the program? How do you do that? And so that's the problem. Anyway, enough of that. We all stand at a turning point. We all stand at a place where we have to make a decision about what we're going to do. I was at the international conference in Atlanta a year and a half ago in July, and we celebrated 80 years of program. And there was this reoccurring kind of nagging thought that kept coming up. Will we be here in another 80 years? Will we be here in another 80 years? Will we be here? Over and over and over again. The 5 days that I was there, I kept thinking about it like this. I think we will. I think we will, because there are so many folks out there who see the importance of, as gently as we can, nudging folks back on track and helping people understand that a simple program of action with God firmly in the center could change our lives in a way so amazingly profound that we could walk away from this and learn how to live a life that was completely different from anything that we'd lived before. I think that we can do this stuff. I remember a time in London, the first trip that I made to England, to London proper, and we couldn't find a single literature-based meeting. We couldn't find one literature-based meeting in the whole town. I don't know if some of you guys spent any time in London lately, but it's one big mother town. It's huge. We found lots and lots of discussion stuff. Within a year's time, there were 10 literature meetings that opened up and were blowing and going. And then there was some hubbub. There were some cult watch guys that got in the middle of it and closed 3 or 4 of them down. But there's still, every time I check their meeting schedules, I still see more and more and more literature-based meetings that are guaranteed to make sure that things stay the way that they're supposed to stay. In Ireland, somebody sent me a copy of their service manual one time, and I was caught completely off guard looking at the bottom of one of the pages in the Irish service manual. At the bottom of a page, it says, the Big Book Study movement is outside the confines of AA in Ireland. Y'all understand what I just said? I mean, I want to be clear. So if I want to go to a meeting and talk about my not being able to get my weed eater started and how frustrated that made me, I'm perfectly okay to do that. But if I want to go to a meeting and talk about the Big Book, talk about the solution as it's written in the basic text, I'm outside the confines of AA. Y'all get how weird that is? I mean, it's just, yeah, I know. Okay, I'll simmer down. I'm sorry. I'll simmer down. Guys, we're the luckiest people on earth. We have an opportunity to not only walk away from booze and dope and food and gambling and everything else in between. We're able to get clear of this crazy addiction like this, but we also have an opportunity to learn how to live our lives and be usefully whole. I get so tired of sitting in AA meetings when I travel and listen to men and women who sound like kids in the things that they share and the things that they talk about. And I'm not judging them. I'm telling you right now, I'm not judging them, because I lived that life forever and ever and ever. And it was only until there was a crusty old guy that loved me enough to tell me the truth about what was going on. He loved me enough to say, Myers, you're going to have to work this work. And it's not going to be about just getting sober and staying sober. It's going to be about how do we live this life authentically? How do we live it real? How do we live it? How long has it been, Myers, since you thought about your character? I remember looking at him, and my eyes got about as big around as Coke cans. And I'm looking at him, I'm going, what are you, character? And he said, yeah. How long has it been since you gave a rat's rear about your character, about who you are as a man? Well, you know, I just, and I'm caught completely off guard, because I think all we're going to talk about is booze and that stuff. What's my character got to do with anything? Well, it turns out it's got everything to do with it, because a life lived with some authenticity, a life lived where I can be authentically who it is that I say that I am, is the greatest indicator of my spiritual sobriety, my greatest indicator of who I am and who I grew to be. You see? I mean, we didn't get sober just so we'd be sober punks, did we? We didn't. We got sober so that we could see who we truly are. And most of you will find in the steps that have been laid out for us in the last 4 hours how amazing most of us saw it. And then if you're like me, most of us recoiled from it because we didn't want to see who we really are. Guys, let me tell you something. The scariest time in my whole life was not when I was drunk or using or out there acting a fool. It was when I did an inventory with Cliff Bishop in the back room of that little church up there where we meet, and I'm sitting in that back room, and he's showing me how inauthentic I am and what a big phony I am and how prideful I am and how dishonest I am and how selfish I am. And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm going, I can't stand it. I remember standing up, and I just busted out crying. And I said, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And he looked at me, and it was funny. He looked at me, and he goes, haven't you read 6 and 7 yet? Guys, I never even connected it up. That the things I was getting ready to realize that were objectionable, the things in my life that I didn't like, I was able to ask God to remove them. And I'm thinking how amazing that whole thing was. And I could change. And eventually my wife would let me move down to the other end of the house where the big bed was. And my kids eventually stopped ducking every time I walked into the room. Y'all understand what I'm saying, right? Y'all get what I'm saying. And I just, it just freaks me out. I want to tell you one more real quick story, and Scout's on it, and I'm out of here. I was talking to a guy the other day on the phone that lives in another town about some stuff we were trying to hire him to do, and we talked for about 10 minutes on the phone, and he said, "Do you don't recognize my name, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't." And I said, "Do I know you?" And he said, "Well, I've met you a couple of times." And I said, "No kidding." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah." He said, I before I lived here, I lived in Dallas, and I went to Primary Purpose a couple of times." And I said, "No kidding." And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "I just want to take a second and tell you how amazingly proud I was to be a part of that group for a little while before I moved. But more than anything, I want to tell you how surprised and caught off guard I was that you were standing out front greeting people." And I said, "Well, that's my favorite gig. Since I stopped making coffee, that's my favorite gig." And he laughed, and he said, "I will remember being there twice when you were out there, and it made me smile real big that you would be involved." And I said, "Well, I would love to tell you that I invented that, but the reality of that stuff is that my sponsor, for 22 years, taught me all that, and he was adamant about how we treat newcomers and how we treat other people in the room. And his fear and my fear were exactly the same, that people would come to our group and leave perturbed because nobody greeted them or nobody welcomed them or nobody helped them find out where they belong in that great big old sea of humanity that is that Tuesday night meeting." Guys, there are some nights I wonder whether that meeting is a meeting or a circus. We have so many people there and so many people go in different directions like that. And Clifford was always the one to tell me, don't spend time with the guys you sponsor. He would tell me this. You could do that any other time of the day. You need to be there for the people who are struggling and the people that are still suffering and see what you can do for them. And that is proven to be the best advice that I've received over and over and over through all of these years. It makes me smile. One more real quick thing. There was this quote that I had in my big book that I've had forever from Gandhi. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. And stapled to the back of it was this quote from this guy named Albert Schweitzer. "I do not know the path in life you will take, but I do know this. If on that path you do not find a way to serve, you will never be happy. We are not alone. We're part of something bigger, and we experience that connection by giving with grace a portion of our time and talent to service." Keith, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to be in the same rooms with you folks and know that each and every one of us have a way to get free and clear of this deadly disease. Thanks for letting me come with you. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.